Coming to you raw and unscripted. Beaming across Ontario and beyond to places like North Bay, Letterkenny, Owen Sound, and Leaside. This is the Real Hickson Real Estate Podcast. Whether you're listening on your commute or putting on your suit, whether it's your morning stroll or you're on patrol, you just finished prayer or dropped the kids at daycare, you're in the bar, your car, or listening with the bathroom door ajar, near or far, this is the Jess and Giro Show. We're grateful for flattery and prone to inaccuracies. This is your guide to Toronto culture, people, events, news, but most importantly, real estate talk. Yes, hello guys. We are back for another exciting episode. Episode 16, Jess. 16.
Wow, it's only taken 2 years.
It's only taken 2 years for that 16. Okay, so who are we here with today, Jess?
Well, the one, the only, Steve Switzer.
Steve Switzer, guys. Everyone welcome Steve. He's here today. We talk about the concepts of real estate, and that's all good and well, but let's talk about the physical real estate property. So, welcome, Steve. I wanted you to just start by introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about what you do here at Forest Hill.
Sure. My name is Steve Switzer. I'm a broker and managing partner here at Forest Hill Real Estate. Along with my partners, I own and operate 3 offices in the Forest Hill family. We have our Vaughan office. We have one down at Bathurst St. Clair in Wychwood. And we have one new office up in Aurora that we're very excited about.
Good stuff. Okay, so I always like to start with a bit of like a market update. What are you seeing happening in the market this week, the last few weeks, the next few weeks?
So right now we're facing some challenges, obviously, in the GTA. We have rising interest rates. We have low consumer confidence, low buyer confidence. As a result, we've seen the number of sales go down. In the short term, we've seen prices come down in some areas. In some areas it's held and it's even gone up, but the number of sales is unquestionably down. Based on what you read, it could be anywhere from 25 to 35%, depending on the area. We have seen this before when the foreign buyers tax came in 2017. This feels a little bit different because interest rates are up and they're continuously going up. So we don't really know what impact that's going to have on the future.
It's not only like affordability, like literally the same person making the same income is just able to afford less, but it's also, I think, especially buyers, they just wait for the bottom.
Correct.
And you don't know when the bottom's going to be until it's about 2 or 3 weeks later.
Right. And I've told people all it takes is one article, one reputable media source reporting that, home prices set to soar again, and you'll see people jump on, like vultures and just try and get whatever they can get. The bottom line is I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what's going to happen over the next couple months. I know that buyers have been very frustrated for the past 10 to 15 years, even as recently as 4 months ago, there were multiple offers on every property. People were getting, buyers were getting blown out of the water repeatedly, offering 100, 200K over ask and still not winning.
And by the way, they were probably settling for homes.
Absolutely.
We talked about this in some TikToks recently, like the advantages of buying in a buyer's market or a market more geared towards a buyer is that not only a price is cheaper, okay, what you're selling might not get as much, but you actually have a lot more time to pick the home, you have a lot more choice, and you're ultimately going to end up with something, I think, better in the long run. Say, as opposed to February when you sell high, fantastic, you make a lot of money, but then what you have to buy, you're kind of putting pressure on yourself to find the right house.
And as always, when you're selling and buying in the same market, it kind of balances out. If you get a great deal on your house, then you're probably going to get less for when you sell.
Yeah.
And as always, it's the people who are the victims of poor timing who suffer the most.
Yeah.
Those people who bought at the height of the market because they had to buy, because there was competition on everything, and then 2 weeks later, they find the value of their home has gone down 20 to 30%.
Yeah.
It's frustrating.
Especially if you would have bought in March, for example, and you're closing like 2 months later. Maybe you had a longer closing. that would put you in a tough
For
position.
sure. And active agents who are doing a lot of deals, it's inevitable. You will have clients, in that situation, and
it happened pretty quickly.
For sure. And sometimes, they get angry. Who are they going to get angry at?
Yeah.
Not the government. It's
No,
typically their realtor.
Yeah.
But it's par for the course. It happens, and we just have to deal with it and move on.
Yeah. I mean, that's something important to mention. A lot of people get frustrated. They think it's the realtor's fault. And really, the person who affects all of this is the buyer at the end of the day.
For sure.
And that's based on supply and demand.
Yeah. I mean, if we're doing our job, then our clients are in the driver's seat at every step of the way. We're keeping them informed. We're letting them know, look, this is happening. This is the latest. And at the end of the day, they make an informed decision, and then we all have to live with it.
Yeah.
Nobody knows what's going to happen in the market. There's literally been an article every week for the past 20 years saying real estate bubble about to burst in the GTA.
Oh, yeah.
And then when it happens after 15 years, everybody says, well, we've been saying this forever. Well, yes, you have
eventually
been saying
you're going to be right.
Eventually, even a broken clock is right twice a day.
Yeah, exactly.
So.
But, what defines a bubble? I mean, a sudden, drop off in housing prices. But really, that opens the door for a lot of buyers that maybe could never afford a home or never thought they could.
For sure.
And all of a sudden, they're at prices where they could, and they jump in. So
the irony
push it back
being
up.
that the rising interest rates have helped buyers get more affordable housing, but the stringent lending conditions have not really helped people jump into that gap. And I think that's why we're seeing so few sales, even though prices have come down, even though demand is still high. You're not seeing a lot happening because people are afraid, or they just can't get financing at all.
I think also another factor is I think people are just away right now. I think this is the first
airport.
true summer,
For sure.
Yeah.
and I think people are just not thinking about it.
That's
It's very easy for us to all be in real estate at all time, but not everyone thinks about it all the time.
True.
So I think that's worth saying.
And then when they come back to Pearson, they have to wait 6 weeks to get their luggage.
So they can't be selling their house.
They'll be busy for a while.
Yeah. Do you think it's going to be a busy fall with this delay?
You know what? I'm not super confident that it is. I think, honestly, it's probably going to take, and this is just my gut, I don't have any real reason to go with it other than 20 years of real estate experience. I think
a pretty good gut.
Yeah, it'll probably be till in the new year. I think things will pick up again, January, February. I think it'll take a while to shake this off. I think another point we should mention is that rates are climbing over close to 5% now. That's still pretty low traditionally.
Oh, yeah.
We've been spoiled for many years, at these under 2% rates. But when I got my first house 20 years ago, my mortgage was at 6.25%.
Yeah.
And my mother tells me about the 80s where she was paying 12-14% on a mortgage. 4.5%, 5%.
And by the way, 2019 we were around this mark as well.
Right.
So
I mean, it's not the end of the world.
No.
People have to
Short-term
get
memory
over
is not
They have to
very
get
good.
over the fact that there's a change. And look at the real situation. Can I still afford this? And in most cases, people who could get a mortgage at 2% could probably still get one at 4.25%.
Yeah.
And if you need less down payment to get into the property, your monthly is a
Exactly.
little bit higher to
For
carry,
sure.
but it's costing you $50,000 less in your down payment.
And imagine this. Okay, so you have to put less down to start with, and the mortgage is going to be less. Let's say you do get a variable right now. Okay, it might still go up for a little bit, but I think it's going to level out and maybe even drop back. You deal with that for a year or maybe 2 years, and then in the future, you've now got a cheaper home, and you could eventually get a cheaper rate.
For sure.
So it's like the best of both worlds.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's also worth mentioning the rental market is out of control right now.
Yes.
The floodgates for immigration, this backed up delay of people coming here, it's now real. And I remember seeing this before, I think before the pandemic, I think we saw a huge influx, and all of a sudden rentals, like every single rental, like let's say a 1-bedroom was about $2,000 a month.
Yeah.
And it was irrelevant to where it was in the GTA. I remember like every single 1-bedroom was just $2,000, right? And now we're looking at like $2,300.
Yeah.
And multiple offers on.
And multiple offers and over asking.
Yeah, and if buyers have their pick of the litter with houses, then landlords have their pick of the litter with tenants. And it's very frustrating for agents who are dealing with residential leases right now because you could have tenant clients who have great credit, earn good income, and they still can't win a property for whatever reason because the landlord has a better feeling about this person, or there's ethnic concerns. Maybe, the landlord is Greek. I want to rent to another Greek.
Right.
You see a lot of this kind of, quiet bigotry in the lease market. And it's kind of upsetting, but it's a fact of our business. It happens. And if you're an agent who's working with tenants, you need to prepare them. Like, listen, you look great on paper, but we still might have to try 4 or 5 times before you get a place.
Yeah. It's tough.
It's interesting too, because like somebody who's making $200,000 as a couple, like they're only going to offer on something so high, and then somebody who's making $400,000 may not offer on a $2,100 place.
Sure.
So it's like, what does the landlord expect sometimes?
Exactly.
Like, if they're making this crazy income, they're not offering on your little 1-bedroom condo. So
for sure. And it should raise heads. Landlords should say, wait a minute, this doesn't check out. Why is this person trying to rent such a small unit? But, it's...
like, their expectations don't meet what they're offering as well.
There's no rhyme or reason to it. You touched on immigration. Ontario is committed to absorbing 400,000-ish new residents every year for the next 3 years. Housing...
Where they're all going to go.
Like, they have to go somewhere.
Are they going to go to Uxbridge? Like, maybe. A few of them.
Yeah.
But I mean, the jobs are in the city. People want to live in the city. Municipal, local, provincial governments are all committed to creating new development. There's high rises going up. Those projects have installed. There's a lot of housing starts all over the GTA. It's just a question of affordability, and you need some people to bump up to one level to make room at the lower levels for people who can't afford those houses. And so far we're not seeing that. Everyone is still at that rental limit. People cannot afford to move up, and they're not moving up, and as a result we have a shortage of rental housing.
And I think inevitably what this is going to do, I think investors are going to start turning their heads back to Toronto, because now the cash flow positive is changing.
True.
And where they had to, maybe they were carrying it for like $2,600, and it was $2,000. They're carrying it for $600 a month. Now we're seeing like $2,300. The interest, the buy is a little bit low, so like maybe $100 or $200.
I had an investor client who owned a few condos around Toronto and wanted to sell them and buy a larger property because at the time, this was probably 8 or 9 months ago, they could get more money renting that 4,000 square foot luxury house in the short term than they could renting a bunch of condos. And now that same investor is trying to divest of that and get more condo units because they're essentially...
the unit level...
It's a cash cow. Like we need rental units, and these condos... whenever there's a stall in the market, it's always the condo market that's hit hardest because they have the most supply. So... buyers of condos are in a good spot right now.
And also, like, people sell condos more often.
Correct.
More transient. Yeah.
So, I mean, there's good and there's bad. They always say every when you close a door, you open a window. There's opportunity.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, there's always a soft market somewhere.
For sure.
It's not the rent. It's not renting. Well, it is if you're on the landlord side.
Right.
And it is if you're, like, looking to buy a condo, for example. So. Okay, so let's jump into the main topic for today. So... on the topic of changing market, I wanted to talk about inspection conditions. And we've seen it change in February to almost just expected to have a firm offer with no inspection condition. Or, to be fair, let's say the listing broker has an inspection report for you to see. But I just wanted you to just start talking about that.
Sure. So, I mean, typically, up until a few months ago... it was pretty common that you were going to be competing with other buyers. Your offer had to be firm, no financing condition, no inspection condition. With the change in the market more recently, there's flexibility for buyers to put those conditions back in. So generally, buyers are asking for an inspection condition. They're asking for a few days to get their financing in order. While we're talking about the financing condition, they're not really wrong to ask for that because people are also having issues with, when the values change quickly in the marketplace, appraisers adjust. The lenders send appraisers to these properties to make sure they're worth what the people are buying. And, another issue affecting buyer confidence is that even though they're paying less for this house, the lender could still send an appraiser out and say, no, you still overpaid. We need you to come up with another 50, 60, 70 grand on your down payment. So, buyer agents are savvy to that, and they're saying, listen, we need a financing condition in there. I need to protect my person in case their lender turns around and gives them a different number. And it's the same situation with inspections. They put them in because they can. They have the leverage. They're typically not competing, or if they are, they're competing with other conditional offers. So why not? For the buyer's call, if I was in their shoes, I'd feel the same way. Spend the $500 on an inspection. Make sure you get an opinion that you're happy with. Flag any issues that you should be aware of. And if you want to proceed with it, go ahead.
And there has been talk about a mandatory cooling off period. Like in Australia, for example, there's a mandatory 10-day cooling off period that every buyer has legally, which I kind of agree with, to be honest. Obviously, though, in this situation, there are more advantages to going in firm versus conditionally. Like, a seller might accept a slightly cheaper offer.
Sure.
But so that's interesting to talk about.
Yeah. Well, typically, I think we still do have a cooling off period for new construction for condominiums.
Yes. Yeah.
I think it's 3 days or something like that. I haven't looked at that in a while. But another thing to consider is that Ontario has title insurance, which a lot of governments don't offer, and that goes a long way in protecting consumers when they buy something firm. At the end of the day, if there's latent defects, if there's things in the home that the buyer should be aware of, it's on them to see it or on their inspector. But in a lot of cases, you can't see these defects. They're hidden in the walls. They're hidden in the attic.
Right.
They're hidden behind a finished basement. And title insurance protects them in that regard. So I mean.
And it's also worth noting there's some clauses that we put in offers regardless that usually are accepted, saying that the appliances are in good working order, and obviously there are some instances where they say as in condition or whatever, but there is still a lot of protection that's there.
And when a buyer's buying a property in as is condition, they usually know what they're getting into. It's been explained to them either by their agent or by their lawyer or both. Like, listen, this could be a project. Whatever you find, you're going to have to fix. It's on you. You've accepted this.
So just quickly, when we do get an inspector in, what are they doing?
So I've been to so many inspections that I could probably do them verbatim.
Right.
And inspections are important, but it's also important to kind of coach your clients in advance and warn them that the inspector may say some things that are frightening and don't make a mountain out of a molehill is the advice I usually give my clients. The inspector is looking for big ticket items, things that are going to cost them money. If there's structural issues, which are very rare, most homes we're looking at are 30 years old or younger, which is not very old for a house. It's a concrete poured foundation with brick facade. You rarely see structural issues in houses like that. In some neighborhoods of Toronto, you could be looking at properties that are 200 years old plus, and you'll see brick walls that are not on a poured foundation; they're actually structural brick. And with properties like that, you could have structural issues. If you see kind of horizontal lines in the side of the brick outside, bowing, waving of the walls, those are big issues. And inspectors are looking at things like that because first of all, it's a safety issue. And secondly, they're super expensive to remedy. Leaks in basements are typically not as big a deal as people think. They're very common. Same with leaky roofs. Like those used to be really expensive fixes, and they're not so much anymore. One thing an inspector will almost always tell people is to fix the grading around their house.
They love to start with that.
They do, and they're right to do it, because when people have leaks in basements in Canada, it's because water is sitting up against the house. There's no basement in this country that doesn't have cracks in it. The freeze-thaw cycle just destroys everything. And concrete poured basements, they crack, and if there's water up against the house, it will get in. If you grade the land away from the house, and if you make sure your downspouts are depositing water a safe distance from the side of the house, you probably won't have any issues. And if you do, again, it can be remedied, usually from the inside if the basement's not finished. If necessary, you can dig outside and remedy it. Those used to be huge repairs that cost tens of thousands of dollars. And in recent years, either because of competition or better technology, they've gotten less expensive. And it's not such a big deal.
You can fill foundation cracks.
Yeah, generally.
You don't have to re-pour it or anything like that.
No. Almost never. And
Yeah.
I mean, even a leaky roof, like it used to cost $15,000 to $20,000 to reshingle a roof. Now it's in the $5,000 to $10,000.
Right.
I don't know why. In the middle of
Everything
supply
going
chain
up.
issues, everything's more expensive.
Yeah.
But some things are actually less expensive than they used to be.
Right.
So I mean, if somebody's buying a house and they don't want to buy a full suite of appliances, the inspector can check the appliances for you. A lot of them will not warranty their appliance inspections. They'll say, listen, I'll run everything just to make sure it works, but I can't, warranty my opinion on the appliances.
Yeah.
And today it works, but you're
Correct.
closing in a month from now.
And the appliances are so high tech now. There's so many functions that
Yeah.
they can't sit there and go through them one at a time.
And you can't like run a wash cycle
Right.
at someone else's
You
house.
turn it on if water comes in, then great.
Right.
Yeah.
You turn on the burner if you see a flame, then
Yeah.
great. You know it's
Yeah.
working.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But in general, they will not warranty their inspection of your appliances. They're looking at the plumbing, mechanical, electrical systems of the home.
Yeah.
Another thing inspectors find all the time is double tapped breakers in the panel. Somebody's doubled up a breaker.
DIY their
Right.
own
I mean,
electricity.
again, it's something that scares the heck out of buyers, and it's really not a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
You have an electrician come; they'll install a space-saving breaker to free up space. As long as the furnace, air conditioner, water heater are all in good shape, I'm pretty much telling a buyer to go ahead unless an inspector has flagged a real structural issue or big leak issues in the roof. Even mold in the attic. Like a lot of the times, people hear mold and they freak out. There's quite an industry built around mold remediation, and in most cases, it's not really that harmful, and it doesn't really impact your life. The attic is kind of a sealed unit. You don't go up there generally. If there's mold up there, it's not going to get out. It's not going to harm you.
Yeah.
Even if you do go up there from time to time and you want it remediated, a company can come, they'll sand it down, they'll apply some kind of
I mean, some
substance
people live
over
in
it.
homes with asbestos,
Of course.
which is safe until
Until it's
you want to
disturbed.
start renovating and changing
Right.
things
Opening it
around.
up.
I mean,
Yeah.
even if I was repping a buyer who was buying a house with asbestos, I would probably tell them to remediate it, get rid of it before closing, if possible. If it's hidden in the walls and you can't do it, it's typically safe as long as it's not disturbed. But as long as everybody's aware of it, and that's why an inspector is good, because they'll find things like that.
Yeah.
And they'll let you know. There's also issues that can affect your insurance, like some older homes still have knob and tube wiring.
Right.
And it doesn't really impact your enjoyment of the home, but a lot of the time when you go to get home insurance, the insurance company says, we're not insuring that. We don't do knob and tube, or they'll charge a premium that's, obviously a shock to the buyer.
Yeah.
So inspectors will flag that. They'll say, listen, here's an issue you're going to have with this. If you want to move ahead with
And
it.
what
be
year
aware.
homes were the ones that had knob and tube?
I would say they stopped using it probably in the late 50s.
Okay.
Completely, but I mean, there's still some homes that were built in the '60s that will have
Right.
it. But typically after that, it's modern wire. It's
And
not.
sometimes it's like in the basement, but upstairs they've
Correct.
replaced it.
Sometimes you'll see, there's 2 or 3 circuits in the home that are still knob
Yeah.
and tube, but it's been updated by.
And what's the
other
big?
people.
What was the biggest issue? Was it the fires that started because of the?
It's not the fires that started. It's that, without getting too technical, knob and tube is an ungrounded system. So,
Right.
so modern electrical systems are grounded, meaning it's very unlikely that someone will electrocute themselves in their home. When you see the old movies where somebody gets in a bath and then drops the toaster in an effort to end their lives,
Yeah.
that probably wouldn't work today because the breaker would trip before you did any real harm to yourself. Knob and tube systems don't have that. So you can electrocute yourself. If you're standing in the wrong place and you make contact with 2 different circuits, you can get very badly burned or
Okay.
worse.
Yeah. I mean, this is what this is all about. Number one, safety. Obviously, living in a home with a mold problem, more than just, something can be remediated. That's a safety issue, electricity, all this kind of stuff.
And just knowing what it's going to cost you, because you don't want to get into your brand new house
For
and
sure.
be like, oh,
Yeah.
there's a $30,000 repair.
At the end of the day, everything comes down to money.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's what an inspector can do for you. They can say, listen, there's nothing wrong with this house, but budget X dollars to take care of this, that, and that.
So it's something worth noting. Some people may consider that the inspector coming in, it allows you to go ahead. It gives you the green light to go ahead or not.
Yeah.
An inspector doesn't warrant anything really. They give you a breakdown of what could happen or what might be happening.
Correct.
But as you said, even the best inspectors, they can't get behind the wall
Right.
and
it's
find
a
out
3-hour
exactly.
inspection. They're
Yes.
not going to tell
Yeah.
you the house is
Yeah.
perfect.
They're there to inspect the systems that you're going to use every day and to look for anything obvious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, but any inspection report you pay for, the first page has a legal disclaimer saying basically, you're paying for my opinion. I'm not on the hook for any damages, whether they're obvious or not. You know, and there have been lawsuits in the past where people sued inspectors, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. But I prepare my buyer clients to say, you know, listen, this guy might not find everything. He's not a god. There's issues sometimes that can't be found.
Yeah.
Even if it's something obvious that he's missed, you're just paying for him to kind of give it a look over and give you an opinion. Don't count on him to find every issue.
Yeah.
And again, as you said, like some inspectors can be very grounded, and you know what, this isn't such a big deal.
Right.
Some might flip backwards, saying
Sure.
there's no way.
Yeah.
You know, so it all comes down to
Well,
the inspector.
we
as
had
well.
a local inspector in the GTA. I won't say his company name, but he caused a lot of heartache because he discovered that if he scared people off of buying a home, he might they might use him 2 or 3 times on other properties
Right.
after they walk away.
Right.
And his reputation kind of preceded him, and eventually he was drummed out of the business because people were so, you know,
Yeah.
teed off with him. Like
Yeah.
I remember at one home, he took out a level and was measuring the stairs for level. You know, like that's a little beyond your purview as a home inspector. I think.
Yeah.
You know, focus
Yeah.
on the important things.
It's great to be thorough, but
Yeah, that's too much.
yeah, that's beyond.
Okay, so apart from inspectors, you know, like it's unrealistic to think that I'm going to go see 10 homes and I'm going to get an inspector for 10 homes.
Right.
It's just not going to happen. So, you know, what we kind of not rely on, but what we look at is not only agents having this experience of inspecting a home, but also for the buyer to be kind of privy to at least some of the major things. So
Sure.
what are the, you know, I know you've been through a few things already, but what are the main things that a buyer should probably be looking for with their agent?
So structure is the number one thing. When you walk the exterior of the property, you want to make sure there's no major cracks. Little cracks in the foundation are not a big deal, particularly vertical, going, you know, kind of up and down. That's usually just shrinkage in the concrete. But if you see horizontal cracks in the concrete or across, you know, layers of brick, that could be indicative of structural issues. You're usually looking on the second floor, if there is a second floor, for water damage. In the drywall, that's a good indicator that there's leaks in the roof that haven't been repaired. Usually you can eyeball the shingles from outside and see the state of it.
Yeah.
A roof typically lasts 20 to 25 years with modern shingles. You can just ask, you know, the owner, when was the last time the roof was done? If you see the house was built 30 years ago and they've never done the roof, that your roof is living on borrowed time.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that the agent can find out.
Sure.
We like to use our fun little MLS property history button, and you can actually go through, and the best agents do this very well. They go through maybe all the previous sales, if there is some, and just see. And if it's noted, you know, back in '95, they replaced the roof then, and the new sale, nothing's changed. So you can tell that, okay, 95, 20 years, you know, we're down to 2015, roof probably needs to get done again.
Absolutely. You can do some detective work through old listings. You can also, I mean, you get a feel for it after a while looking at homes. I can look at a roof and say that's been done in the last 10 years, or that's going to need some work in the near future. Usually, if you want to look at the age of a home, you know, on the side of the windows, if you open them, sometimes there's a sticker with the installation date.
Yeah.
Same with the furnace, air conditioner, water heater. Those all typically have tags placed on them by the installer and by the last person who serviced them. So, you know, a furnace typically lasts 10 to 15 years. If you see that it's 12 years old, you know, you have to budget for that in the next few years. And it's not a matter of your buyer walking away. It's a matter of them knowing, listen, I have to put some money aside.
Yeah.
In the next few years, I'm going to need a furnace in this place.
Yeah.
But outside of that, I mean, wear and tear items, you want to see if the place was well cared for. If the house looks pretty beat up, it's probably a safe bet that they're not doing any maintenance on the systems you can't see either. Mechanical, electrical, plumbing, you know what I mean? Do all the fixtures work? Does hot and cold come to every appliance? Are there any plugs in the house that don't work, which is typical? If people have not maintained their home well, a coat of paint can hide a lot of issues, but if there's more serious stuff, if the ducts have never been cleaned, if the furnace has never been maintained, if the filters aren't changed all the time, like that can really kind of gum up the system with dust.
I mean, if I come to a house and there's like dying bush in the front, as opposed to like a beautiful row of like dandelions or whatever, you can kind of get a feel of.
Those are weeds.
Oh, it's daffodils. Hey, you never know what people are into.
No, but the front door of the house shows a lot. Like the stairs going into the house, you can already get a feel what the.
But I've also noticed sometimes that there's inside people and outside people, and sometimes you'll drive up to a house that has zero curb appeal, completely neglected yard, but inside is gorgeous and updated and modernized and well maintained.
Yeah, they just don't have a green thumb.
And sometimes it goes the other way. Sometimes you pull up to a house and it's beautiful outside, and then you go inside and you're like, oh my God, has nobody cleaned this place in a year? They spend all their time outside, so that's what they see.
They bring the dirt inside.
That's right.
So I guess that kind of segues to the next question, which is, okay, that's all good for buyers who are going to buy, but what about people that might sell this year, they might sell next year, in 5 years? What are things they can do to take care of the home and keep it, not only for resale value, for just like quality of life as well?
Well, there's big things you can do and there's little things you can do. Big things like renovations typically pay big dividends, but it's also not something that you want to do if it's really not necessary. Like I always tell people, put your money into the kitchen, put your money into bathrooms. Those are the kind of rooms that bring wow factor, that impress people right when they walk in. And that's what make people fight over properties, even in a market like this. But that said, if you live in a 40-year-old house that needs floors, fixtures, it has the popcorn ceilings, and there's just so much work that needs to be done, I don't typically recommend my sellers to put big money into the kitchen or the bathrooms, because whoever buys it is probably just going to rip it out anyway.
I've been in homes where I know that they've just recently renovated, and my clients have walked in and just said, oh, I would change this, I would change this, I would change this.
Right. So, I mean, you're doing your seller a disservice by making them spend their money on things that are not going to bring a big return. Typically, like an interlocking driveway looks great, increases curb appeal. It usually brings more value than you spend on it. Same with renovating a kitchen or a bathroom. But again, if the house needs so much work that whoever buys it is just going to gut the whole thing, tell your seller to save their money. Get what you can get for the house. Put that money into fixing your next house.
And my least favorite is probably when I walk into a home and there's been generations of renovations. Like one original buyer did this, and then another one kind of went over the top, maybe used flooring or something like that.
Every bedroom has a different floor.
Every bedroom has a different floor. The paint was never like sanded back to do new paint, and you end up with like thick.
Or not just that. Sometimes they just put a new floor on top of the old one. When you take a vent cover off on the main floor, sometimes you'll see hardwood and then a vinyl tile on top of it, and then a ceramic tile on top of that. Like it's ridiculous.
And then you see the some of those TV shows on cable, they pull back and there's hardwood floor underneath. They get all excited, because it's because that style's kind of come back. But
you do see that in older homes. Sometimes even in the manor, at Batherston Shepherd area, you'll see a lot of homes with original strip hardwood that have broadloom laid on top of it, and you rip it up and it's pristine. But for the most part, in an older home, you have to go in expecting to do a fair amount of work to get it the way you want it. So those are big things. Little things are easier. It's about like changing light bulbs, updating to LED lights, which will make your home look brighter. It'll show better, unless it's a real disaster, in which case it'll just highlight all the problems with it.
Just spotlight.
Making sure that the sellers maintain the furnace properly, changing filters. Same with the water heater, air conditioner. When people come to the house, it has to at least look presentable. It has to look like these things have been well maintained. If people walk into your furnace room and see a puddle of water around your furnace, it doesn't instill a lot of confidence in them that this place has been well maintained. But
and everybody freaks out about water. That's the first thing.
For sure.
Right?
And it's usually not that big of a deal. But it has to be dealt with.
And air fresheners downstairs.
For sure. When you walk into a house and you're hit with perfume, or a wall of perfume when you walk in, the first thing you think is, what's this person hiding?
Yeah.
Where are the bodies buried?
Yeah.
But aside from that, staging can make a big difference. Even in an outdated property, I've sold houses that had older furniture that was in good shape, and my inclination when I walked in was to say, well, we don't need to stage this. The furniture is in pretty good shape. But then I would bite the bullet and hire a stager, and it would be night and day.
Yeah.
It's amazing. You can take an old-fashioned space.
Yeah.
If you have the furniture in there, it will obviously look like that era. You pull that furniture out, you put modern furniture in, especially something like mid-century modern that kind of is a gateway between two different worlds, and it really changes the whole flow and an idea of the house.
Yeah. I've really warmed up to staging over the last few years. I've found some good people that I like to work with, and it makes a huge difference. And it adds that wow factor I was talking about earlier. And it entices people who otherwise would not have made an offer to maybe come in and try something.
The way I like to explain it is the mind of the buyer, they're seeing the photos online. They're seeing 1,000 homes. They see the photos online and it looks fantastic. It looks like a magazine or something like that. And then they go to the home and it still looks like a magazine. And as long as that's not interrupted by something, in their mind, it's going to be, they're going to be more likely to be interested in it.
You want buyers to be able to envision a home as their own, and when it looks possibly better than the house they live in now,
exactly,
it goes a long way psychologically to bridging that gap to getting them to offer on the property. And
we find a lot of the times we've had instances where the buyers want to buy some of the furniture and some of the wall paintings and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's hard to be creative after seeing a space. You're like, I liked it like that.
For sure.
So
which is really interesting because for the seller, they're like, okay, so I don't have to go through all the BS of Facebook Marketplace or selling on an eBay or something like that. And this guy's just going to buy it probably more than what it's worth.
Yeah.
But then for the buyer, if you add that to the purchase price, it's a mortgaged amount.
For sure.
You're like mortgaging furniture.
That's why when I work with buyers and they want to buy stuff direct from the seller, I tell them handle that on your own.
Yeah.
Keep that separate from the transaction.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're in the business of selling houses.
I'll tell people, listen, if you want to pay me commission for your furniture, then by all means.
I know, we start negotiating.
But you're better off just dealing with the seller direct.
Yeah.
Let me handle the property purchase, and you deal with the chattels on your own.
Yeah.
And in terms of legally, what's the best practice for that if someone wanted to do that? Because there's obviously agency involved, representation and confidentiality to some degree.
Yeah. Well, buyers and sellers, you're hiring a real estate lawyer to broker the transaction anyway. You have these people working for you. Let them draw up something. It takes 10 minutes of their time to draw up a quick contract saying, the buyer is buying these chattels from the seller. You itemize them. You can even include pictures if you want. If I'm selling a home that has really high-end appliances, I'll usually get the serial numbers of the appliances and put them in the offers, because on rare occasions sellers have done the old switcheroo where the appliances that you find when you close are not the ones that were there before.
Yeah.
So same thing with any chattels you're buying direct from the seller. I would take pictures of it. Sometimes these pieces are quite expensive. These tables and chairs, that's one industry that from the pandemic, prices have sometimes tripled, quadrupled, and there's no sign of them ever returning to their original rates. That's the new fact of reality. Furniture is really expensive. Yeah, especially patio furniture. If you've tried to get anything for your backyard in the last year, good luck to you.
We bought ours just before the pandemic, so I think we did well.
Yeah. We're not replacing it anytime soon.
So if I was repping a buyer in that situation, I would itemize everything down to the manufacturer, the make, and let the lawyer draft something.
Yeah, and go through the lawyer. Yeah. Because when you said direct, maybe people think you just calling them up, the buyer's calling up the seller, but
it's all got to be handled properly.
First, you purchase the home, and then you can determine the stuff you'd like in the home. That's the most important thing.
Okay, so I wanted to go a slightly different direction. Did you want to talk quickly about cottages? I know some people will eventually look at cottages. A lot of the stuff you just explained is all applicable to this stuff, but cottages have a few extra little things to think about, septic tank and water well and all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. So cottages have been crazy for the last several years, especially after the start of the pandemic when people couldn't travel. They were investing in secondary properties. That is finally starting to quiet down now, just like the rest of the market. It was not atypical to see cottages list for $549 and then selling multiple offers for $900,000.
Wow. Yeah.
And this is a cottage where all the comparables have sold for $500.
Wow.
So I mean the jump in value for some of these, quite frankly, unimpressive properties
Very
is
far
staggering.
away.
And it escalated quickly, and properties that would have sold for $800 were selling for $1.4. Now what we're seeing is that those cottages are still on the market for $1.4 and they're sitting for 30, 40, 50 days. So buyers have finally said enough. First of all, just like you said, people are traveling. So that need to have that property has diminished now that people can travel.
I think the mentality was we couldn't really travel anywhere else, so we may as well travel Ontario. And I think a lot of people bought, just like they changed their homes because they were looking at their 4 white walls in the middle of the pandemic.
Yeah.
They were thinking, oh, what can we do for now?
Another space to be in, another
space
four walls to be in.
For sure.
Yeah.
And it was, I kind of had to laugh because I was dealing with some buying of cottages around the start of the pandemic, and the mentality of some of the agents out there, no disrespect at all, but they just weren't ready for it.
Yes.
And I remember this place had come on the market, my client and I were kind of on top of it, and we were going to look at, it was day 2 of being on the market, and I was about to head up, and this guy said, we've received an offer. And I said, okay, well, can we still go and see it today and all that kind of stuff? And he said, well, I've got about 10 agents coming from Toronto, but they just accepted the first offer that came in.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, man,
these are people who typically don't deal with high volume. They put a lot of energy. I've met some fantastic agents that work exclusively in cottage country. Particularly Muskoka, the Kawarthas, and over the past 2 years, I've had a few clients purchase cottages. So I've worked with a lot of these agents. And a lot of them have been very upfront with me saying, I don't know how to handle this situation. I've never had this before.
I actually really appreciate the honesty and is very respectful.
Well, it was a big change.
Very different marketplace.
One agent was frazzled. He's like, I don't know what to do. There's 20 people calling me. I don't know what to do.
They're used to selling maybe a few houses a year or something like that.
And he's like, one person at the beginning of the pandemic, I called him. His property was listed for, I think, $599. And I said, what comparables are you showing your seller? I just want to, get an idea of what this place is worth to your seller. And he said, the comparables I showed him all sold for under $600, but between you and me, I don't know what the F is going on. I've already got 30 people calling me. I've got 3 offers in my hand right now, all for over $700. He's like, I don't know what is happening. I don't know what to do. So he was very upfront and honest, and, good for them. They these people work hard. They have markets that have never experienced that kind of climb in such a short period of time, and let them make when they can make. That's what I say. Yeah. But now things have kind of settled back down to more reasonable times. You'll see probably prices will come down over the next few months, especially now that fall is, we're basically lost this summer season for any cottage purchase. So people are looking to next year, and I for one am glad. I hope prices do come down a little bit.
Yeah. Okay, so it's all super exciting. We bought a cottage, but now it's first worth talking about when you're buying a cottage, you actually have to do a water test as part of the appraisal process for financing.
Yeah. I mean, you don't always have to, but typically it's done. So some other concerns you mentioned the septic tank earlier. So basically, most cottages are not hooked up to municipal sewers. The waste goes into a septic tank, which is basically just a concrete holding tank underground. It filters your waste into different layers. It spreads it out over kind of a large area, usually of grass on one side of the property. They do need to be maintained. They need to be emptied, usually every 2 or 3 years, depending on the size of it. And most importantly about septic tanks, aside from the shape they're in and if they work, is their capacity. Because a lot of times people will buy a 3-bedroom cottage thinking they're going to convert it to a 4 or 5 bedroom. They're going to finish the basement and rent it out. But the septic tank can't handle waste for that many people. Yeah.
So, and an everyday, as opposed to somebody coming up every other weekend.
Correct. Right. So if you're gonna Airbnb a place week by week, and this septic tank was built to handle a family that's there 2 months out of the year, you're going to very quickly have problems. Yeah. And it doesn't mean you can't bridge those problems. You just have to empty the tank more often. You know? but it's something your buyer needs to be aware of going into it, and an inspector can help you with that.
And would you recommend like a inspector who's more in
Yes.
that world, right?
Typically, yeah. If I'm buying a cottage with a client, I would tell them to hire somebody local.
Yeah.
I have a good guy in Toronto who does a lot of cottage properties, so I usually push him. But use whoever you're comfortable using, but definitely get somebody who handles cottages.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The water supply is another issue. A lot of these places are not on municipal water supply. It either comes from the lake or there's a drilled well, and those have different concerns. If it's coming from the lake, that's fine. You have to make sure that the pump that's bringing it in gives you the flow you need.
Yeah.
You need some kind of filtration or cleaning system. I mean, a lot of times people will have a limited system and they use the water for showering and bathing, but they don't use it for cooking.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's another thing that's come down is the equipment. In price is the equipment to filter water. You can get a UV system, these sodium tank systems that do a really good job cleaning water. They're not super expensive. So I mean, I've bought cottages with clients where the potability test failed. The water was not safe even to shower with.
Really?
And for under $5,000, they installed a system that got it just as clean as any drinking water.
So again, like 2022, there's a lot of solutions out there.
Yeah.
And if you love the property, like don't let something like that stop you.
The real problem with wells and sometimes even lake is the flow rate. You need to make sure that the pump is strong enough to provide good water pressure. There's nothing worse than getting in the shower and feel like somebody's spitting on you. You want good pressure.
Especially after being in the lake. Yeah.
So I mean, the pump is important. The inspector will look at that as well. Some of these water lines are not heated because people only use them 3 seasons. If the water line is not heated, you won't be able to get water in the winter. So another thing that can be expensive, if the water line is dug underground from the lake to the property and it's not heated, they'll have to dig it up and kind of.
So it's a good point. I had a client that the previous owners lived there year round.
Yeah.
And he was there kind of semi-seasonally.
Yeah.
Like he would go there pretty often, but not often enough. And the pipes froze because the water wasn't running enough.
Right.
Like it would usually.
Yeah. That happens in Toronto too with vacant properties. I mean, you need to use your plumbing through the winter, especially if your heating's off for certain periods of time.
Yeah, for the snowbirds.
But for cottage properties, I mean, typically people are buying waterfront properties. The waterfront is, for me, one of the most important things. You need to be able to go seasonally where you can look at it, where you can see what the water looks like.
Yeah.
How deep is it off the dock? How big of a dock can you build? A lot of the times the bylaws have limits on how far out the dock can go. There are parts even in the west coast of Lake Simcoe where the water levels have receded to the point that owners have to build 100 feet of dock just to park a boat. Yeah.
Wow.
So
is that like a global warming issue? Like
I honestly
change?
don't know what it is.
Or is that is that something that's happened before?
I'm not sure about Lake Simcoe. I mean, typically water levels are rising in most places, so I don't think it's a global climate issue. I think it's more a matter of, the water levels in Ontario are managed through a lock system, and it has, deep ranging effects throughout Ontario, even for places that are not connected to the Trent waterway. Their locks can affect the water levels of other bodies of water somehow.
Yeah, for sure.
So I don't know why, to be honest, but I know that a lot of owners are putting in docks that are not legally permissible because they're too long. But the government kind of looks the other way because you bought a waterfront property to enjoy the water. And what are you going to do?
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah.
What else can I tell you about cottages? I mean, the big things are the water supply, septic systems. Like any other place, how is it heated? A lot of these places don't have natural gas service, so there'll be either large propane tanks on site, which are filled, monthly, seasonally, whenever, and those can power a furnace, a forced air furnace, just like we use natural gas here in the city. A lot of times it's electric heat, which can be, expensive, frankly, but it is what it is. So your clients have to know what they're getting into. They have to know what their heating bills are going to be compared to a house here.
And realistically speaking, there may be some people even now looking for cottages, and obviously prices have gone so high that they may be looking at some of the more basic cottages.
Sure.
So then when you get basic cottage, you start to get wood burning stoves. You start to get, there's no, even some of the wiring for telephone lines and stuff like that. That can be
Internet
costly
connection.
because Bell or Rogers gives you a certain amount of distance, and then you have to
Right.
cover the rest, kind of thing.
There's cottages all over Ontario that have no internet service.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's no service there, wired or otherwise. And there's satellite service in some areas, which is 4 to 5 times the cost of a typical landline internet service.
Yeah.
That's something your people need to know before they buy it, or because who are they going to get upset with when they find out that
they
they
can't
have
work
no
up
internet?
there. That's
Right.
why they were going up. Yeah.
So they're going out, they can do the Zoom meeting, the
But
high
there's,
definition
there's
video
big
call.
initiatives to bring up rural
Of course.
Wi-Fi.
But people also don't realize how big this province is.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
big. If you've ever driven through the States, you can drive through 4 or 5 states in less time than it takes you to drive through Ontario.
Yeah.
Ontario is a big place.
Yes, it is. And you mentioned wood stoves. That's another good point. Like, wood stoves are great. They're not the most efficient heat source, but they are kind of charming and old-timey,
Yeah,
which people
I mean, not
like.
everyone wants that full glamping lifestyle. Some
Right.
people want to just a little cabin in the woods that has
Sure.
a stove to heat, and that's kind of it. Depending on
But
what you
another
want from
thing,
it.
talking about inspections and cottages, like there's something called a WETT certification, WETT, and that has to do with wood stoves and the chimney system, making sure that there's no blockages,
Yeah,
that it's clean.
so there's no carbon
Right.
monoxide
That-
coming
that's
into
important, because if you start burning wood in those things and there's any kind of blockage, you're going to get smoke and carbon
And
monoxide.
if
coming
you're
back
doing
into
that
the
overnight and you're sleeping there, and
that's it.
Yeah.
Right. Very,
That's
very
where you go to
potentially dangerous.
lay your last night.
So usually when you're buying a cottage, if you see something in the remarks saying no WETT certification for wood stove,
Yep.
your clients know that they need to spend money getting that certified, making
Yeah.
sure it's clean.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah.
taking another turn, just to talk about a couple more things that I think are important. I wanted to talk lastly about UFFI and also Kitech. I think Kitech's the biggest one.
Yeah.
So let's start with UFFI.
So UFFI was a form of insulation used, I think, in the 60s and 70s. You don't really see it too much anymore. It's kind of like asbestos in that when you see it, if you can remediate it, you do, but you don't necessarily have to as long as it's not being disturbed. I haven't seen that in my career, to be honest. I've dealt with some older homes that had asbestos insulation that had to be removed, but I haven't seen UFI anywhere. But think of it as the same as asbestos. It's something that you should remediate if you can. It definitely has health concerns, but if it's not going to be disturbed, it's probably fine.
Yeah.
And the other thing you mentioned was
Kitech.
So Kitech plumbing was a plastic plumbing system used as late as the early 90s, I think, which was basically found to be faulty. It wasn't very good at handling high-pressure loads like you would find in condo buildings where water's being pumped up 20 floors, so it's under a lot of pressure, and joints were breaking and it was leaking. Now, to be honest, it's probably fine in 80% of the applications it was used, but because insurance companies flagged it as an issue, it now has to be removed wherever it is. As soon as you buy a place that has Kitech plumbing, your insurance company will either tell you that it has to be remediated, or they're going to charge you a premium that's,
You might as well just remove
ridiculous.
it.
So that's something important worth noting. People hear the word Kitech and they freak out.
Right.
I went through this recently with a client, and it was fully disclosed.
Yeah.
And they bought it knowing that at some point they may have to remediate it.
Right.
They understand what it costs. There was actually a company doing quotes.
Yeah, the prices have gone down as
That
well.
was for a condo, right?
A townhouse.
It was a townhouse, condo
Okay.
townhouse.
Yeah.
So the interesting thing was that, to replace it was a certain price. But then in order to redo the drywall and a few other things, it actually ended up being a lot more.
Right.
But, through doing research, it's really, it's definitely a known factor. But I think it's about 1% of all of what has been installed is actually an issue.
Right.
It was a specific grade of metal that was produced in a specific plant. It's kind of like
At this
car
point,
recalls.
it just makes sense to remediate
For sure.
it.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
once an insurance company, as an industry, says we're not insuring this,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter whether
Yeah.
it's factually accurate or not.
Yeah,
It's done.
and if you are that 1%, you're going to be upset. So you
Yeah.
might as well just
Right.
get rid of
The
it.
good news is most condo developments have kind of jumped in front of the bullet.
Yeah.
They've basically said, listen, this is something we need to deal with.
Yeah.
We have a plan. This is what it's going to cost. We're dealing with it. We plan to change all of it over the next X years. Here's your fee as the owner of this townhouse or this unit in this building. And it's usually not crazy.
No, because now they're doing a group rate, right, with all the units, so
Right.
it seems like to be more reasonable.
And it's a lot easier to do it all at the same time or as part of a planned project rather than, let the owners decide when they want to do it. So it's not as big of a problem as it used to be, but it's something to be aware of. If you're buying in a building that has it, it's going to have insurance concerns, and it's going to cost you money at some point to remove it.
And it's disclosed now. At least it's not a hidden defect.
Yeah.
And it's something that's going to come up in a status report. There's a lot of stuff to still talk about, and we can't make all of it today. But basically, just quickly on a status review, it's to do mainly with condos. It details how the property is being managed and the budgets and all that kind of stuff. Similarly, with an inspector, this goes to the lawyer and they review it for the certain bylaws. Right. Maybe dogs aren't allowed, or you're not allowed barbecues or something like that. But just quickly on status.
So the main thing you're looking for, or that the lawyer's looking for in status, is the financial health of the building. They look at the reserve fund. They look at how much money this condo corporation has collected for the repairs and maintenance they have planned, and they look at whether or not that amount is realistic for a project of that scope. If you are living in, for example, Skyrise at Yonge and Clark, it's 2 towers, 7,300 Yonge, 1 Clark. They each have probably 500 units. I don't know how many, but they're large buildings. There's a shared underground parking. There's a swimming pool. There's a gym. That's an expensive project to maintain. And parking garages need to be resealed. The floors need to be redone. The ceilings need to be redone. The tennis court needs to be resealed. If the lawyer looks at the amount sitting in the reserve fund and it looks low to them, and I don't even know what that figure should be for that project, but they do. And they'll flag it right away. They'll say, listen, these people have, $500,000 worth of work scheduled for the next 10 years, and there's only $250,000 in the reserve fund. There's something wrong with that. Yeah. Similarly, they're looking at title, making sure that the person who's selling the unit doesn't have any outstanding fees, levies against them. Nobody's put any liens on the property. It's just checking the health of the unit and the building at large to make sure that you're not going to get any surprises.
Yeah, and to tie back into what we're talking about, inspections, a lot of the exterior stuff is covered. There's a lot less things to worry about when you're buying a condo versus buying a house.
Sure.
But there's still little things to look for, water under sinks and stuff like that when you're inspecting a condo.
Even more so, like if you're buying a condo in a tower and the windows are quite old, if you look, you visit the property in the winter and you can feel a draft through the windows, well, the lawyer can look at the status and see if they plan to replace the windows anytime soon.
And it could be a special assessment.
Right. And if the windows are 30 years old and there's nothing in the plans about them changing it, they're going to do it eventually. And
And
where does that money come from?
Or then you would be worried that is this building being properly managed?
Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And buildings, I mean, a lot of the time I'll call a lawyer and say, I'm sending you a status, I need you to review it right away. And they'll say, what building? And I'll tell them, and they'll say, that one's fine.
Yeah.
Before
They're
they
so
even look at it, they know the building inside out.
Yeah.
It's well managed, the property management is on top of everything, and, reputation means a lot.
Yeah. And as you said with inspections, I'm fairly confident to look at a status. I've seen so many statuses now that I can kind of go through it, and I've talked to Jonathan enough, to lawyers, and been through some of the meetings.
Reputable builders. You know the management companies that are
well. For sure.
Yeah, it's a matter of liability for me. I'm still putting it in the lawyer's hands.
Exactly.
Oh, for sure.
Every time.
Yeah, every time. Okay, just to kind of wrap it up, what are the best practices for someone that's thinking about selling their home? What are the little things they can be doing before or whilst they're talking to an agent before they put their property on the market?
I would say the number one thing people don't do enough is declutter. Okay, homes don't have to be renovated. They don't even have to be super clean, but they have to be decluttered. When someone walks into your home, they shouldn't see horizontal surfaces covered with magazines, with papers. They shouldn't see your personal stuff anywhere. If you can remove personal family photos, do it. Anything, even like religious items, I tell people all the time, I respect your faith, but buyers who are walking into this place want to envision it as their own. They don't want to see religious things lying around. Yeah. Anything personal that you can remove, you're going to remove it anyway when you move. Yeah. Why not pack it up now?
You mentioned it earlier. You said, people need to imagine themselves in the house.
Right. And you have to make it easy for them to do that. And, there are some times where I won't recommend staging. The furniture's fine, whatever. but I will definitely spend time going room to room with them, making a list of everything I want out of the room.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's just one piece of furniture, there's nothing wrong with it, but it doesn't need to be there, and it's adding to the clutter. It's making a big room look small.
Yeah.
I'll say, let's take this out, let's change this picture for that. I've collected a lot of my own art over the years just from buying it for, for my own staging.
Yeah.
So if there are pieces that are, don't work very well or they're controversial in any way, I'll take them off, I'll change them with something else, you know what I mean?
Yeah, don't cause any unnecessary drama.
If you're selling a bachelor's unit and there's beautiful naked women hanging on the walls everywhere, you might want to change that up a little, make it a little more generic.
Maybe,
But in terms of, little maintenance things or slight renovations they can do, I know you've touched on it before, but
it's hard to say without seeing a particular property. But I mean, if I walk into a room and something jumps out at me as being really old-fashioned or out of place, I might recommend replacing it. No examples jump out at me right now. But if anything looks dirty, like I walked into one house and the doorknobs were all filthy, and there was a ring of dirt around the knob on every door. And I said, this, we have to do something about this.
Marks on the light switches.
Stuff like that. Like scuffs from kids is okay. Like if the corners are a little beat up, I can live with that. But when a house looks dirty, it's an instant turn off to anyone who walks in. So if you see that stuff, clean it. If you can't clean it, replace it, paint it, touch it up, do whatever you got to do.
Yeah.
Make it look as fresh and clean as you possibly can. Another thing you can do with decluttering is emptying closets. People always look through closets. They look through drawers. I know that's disturbing for sellers to hear, but it's the truth.
Happens.
I had a client call me recently, or not a client, a buyer agent call me and say, hey, we just finished a showing at such and such a house, and your clients left a lot of cash and their passports in a drawer in their closet.
Oh my God.
And I said, why are you going through their drawers?
Yeah.
And she said, we always do. Everybody does that. That was her defense. But she's not wrong. People do it.
She was worried.
Another thing on that point is tell your clients to put their valuables away.
Yeah.
Jewelry, cash, passports, anything small and expensive, electronics, get rid of it. Put it somewhere they can't find it.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think that kind of wraps it all up. There's a lot of content here. But
a lot of good info.
I'm happy
basically, I guess the bottom line is take care of your home, and it will be worth it in the end.
Yeah.
Well, it's your biggest asset, right? You
For
should
sure.
care about it.
And I mean, bring in a friend who hasn't seen your house in a long time, and just tell them, listen, give me an honest opinion.
Yeah.
If you were looking at this house as a buyer, give me, walk in and tell me exactly what you think.
Yeah.
And if it's a good friend who can be honest with you, you're going to hear a lot of things that
and as a seller, don't get offended. Don't get offended by something. There's pride of ownership, but at the end of the day, you're selling it to someone else.
Yeah. When I sit down in listing presentations, I tell people right off the bat, your house is a product to me. I'm going to talk about it as if it's a product. Please don't think I'm being rude. I have no emotional connection to any property I sell. So, and the buyers who look at it are going to feel the same way.
Yeah. So
you have to be able to take criticism without getting offended.
Yeah.
And once you explain it to people, it's the same situation when they're getting their house ready for sale.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful ashtray your kid made you in the 3rd grade. But you know what? It shouldn't be when people are coming to look at your house. So.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Steve, I think that kind of wraps it up for this. Obviously, guys, if you have any more questions, you can reach out hicksonrealestateteam@gmail.com. You can hit up Steve on you're all over Instagram and all that kind of stuff as well.
At Steve Switzer Homes. And
there you go.
StephenSwitzer.com. Thank you very much for having me on.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for all your knowledge. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Again, it's something that we like to talk a lot about the concepts of real estate, but the physical real estate itself, it's really important to think about and talk about. So thank you so much.
We all learned something today.
We all learned something.
I hope so.
Guys, thank you so much for being with us. See you later.